Hey there, Jeremy Goodrich, your host for the Shine Insurance YouTube channel. And our video today is whether you should hire a public adjuster for an insurance claim or not. So if you're in a claim scenario where you've had a public adjuster approach you saying that this is something you need, let's go through the process of what the pros and cons are and see if it actually is something that you need. So what will we address in this video? Well, we'll first explain what a public adjuster is. Obviously, we need to understand what it is to know whether you need it or not. Then we'll talk about the pros and cons of a public adjuster. And we'll finally go into what is the right time. When is the right time to hire a public adjuster? I'll give you some insights about that. And then as always, we'll dig into some rookie mistakes at the very end of the video. All right, let's get right to it. So first we have to understand what adjusters are. We're saying what role does this person play in an insurance claim? And they are individuals charged with applying the coverage in your insurance policy, the policy you have, to bad things that happen and deciding the outcome of what to do. An insurance policy is there to pay out for bad things that happen that are covered on the policy. And so adjusters' jobs are to look at the policy, read the policy, look at what's covered, look at the bad thing that happened, see what that is, and see how those two combine to decide how to pay out that claim. Now, there actually are multiple different potential adjusters involved in a claim. And before I get into the different adjusters, I want to say that you also have an independent agent. This agent, if you work with an independent insurance agency, does not work for the insurance company, and through this entire process can help you as well. So just to throw that out there. So there are really three different kinds of adjusters that are possibly involved in a claim. The first is always involved in a claim. This is the company adjuster. This is the person who works for the company, whose job it is to decide what's covered and what's not and write checks for the claim. Very clear, very simple. That is the company adjuster. Now, oftentimes there's something called a field adjuster, and this is a person hired by the company to adjust the claim. And then finally, the thing we're here to talk about today, public adjusters, and I'll get into them just in a second. So like I said, a company adjuster is the company employee who is the decision maker. This is the one who cuts the checks. This is the person you want to be super kind to throughout the process and want to navigate the process with, because they are ultimately the decision maker in the process. The field adjuster is the person hired by the company. This may be the person you see. The company adjuster sometimes is just in the office. You never actually see them. Maybe you talk with them or email with them or whatever, but you don't actually see that person because the company hired a field adjuster, and that field adjuster is the one who came out, assessed the damage, and wrote up a report that they deliver to the company adjuster. So those two people are the most common company representatives in a claim situation. Like I said, sometimes the same person as the company adjuster, like I said before. All right, let's get into the topic that we are here to talk about today, the public adjuster. So this person is hired by the policy holder to come to your property, assess the damage, and write up a report that is delivered to the company adjuster. So this is someone that if you're the one going through the claim, if you're the policy holder, you choose to hire this person outside of the insurance company. This isn't the company adjuster, not the field adjuster, someone you hired, and that is called the public adjuster. This is not a required part of the claim process. In fact, most claims do not have a public adjuster involved in them. So not required in the claim process. Importantly, and I think this gets covered up by a lot of particularly covered public adjusters who are trying to become a part of the deal, they get compensated, and all public adjusters get compensated in different ways, but generally they get compensated about 15% of the claim payout. So once that claim pays out, they are going to take 15%, and then whatever's left is what you have to pay for the damage that was done. So you've got a company adjuster, a field adjuster, and a public adjuster. So let's talk about the pros and cons of a public adjuster. Well, the pros are you have representation by someone who is on your side, and it could potentially be less work for yourself. The cons are that 15% of the claim loss, like I talked about, and it can very much clog up the process. So let's talk about each of those. First, a pro. You have representation. A public adjuster should be able to look at the scenario with a professional eye and make sure you're getting every penny you deserve from the insurance company. So they are looking at this. They're a professional. You're not a professional. So they're able to look at it with a different eye and look at it from your side, trying to get every penny they can for you in the claim. All right, that's pretty fair. And having that kind of representation could make sense. Pro is also less work. So they may be able to take some of the work off of your shoulders, especially in bigger claims. There is some work that comes with it in analyzing the situation and knowing what you had when you lost, knowing what the loss was, all those kinds of things. There is no doubt that there is some work in a claim scenario on your part to be able to present to the insurance company what you lost, right? You've got to be able to show what you lost as a part of that process. Sometimes a public adjuster can help with that, so it is less work. What are the cons? Well, the huge one to me, the biggest one to me, is the 15% of the claim is lost. This is the biggest issue with hiring a public adjuster, is you just hand this money over to them. And this is the big problem with it. Especially with property claims, insurance policies are made to replace what you lost and no more. They also shouldn't replace less, depending on how the policy is set up, but they're there to replace what you lost, right? So even the best public adjuster is only going to be able to get the policy to replace what you lost. But now you have to replace it. And if they take 15% of that payout, you now have 15% less to replace what you lost. And especially when it comes to a building, if you insured for the total value of replacing that building and then 15% of that is gone, now you can't replace that building anymore. And so that's where the big con comes. And the big problem with public adjusters is the cost associated with them pulling out of money that you would have had to replace the things that you lost. Another thing that I think folks don't really realize, but is so true, and I see every time a public adjuster is involved, is that it clogs up the process. I want you to think about a scenario that you've gone into where you were sitting and talking with some people, and then someone in that room brought a lawyer and said, "Hey, I have a lawyer here with me." What happened in that situation? How did the conversation change? How did it become less open, right? The vibe completely changes. Now, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with lawyers. It just means that when you bring representation into the room, the vibe changes, the experience changes, and everyone involved comes at it through a different lens. It's just the reality of how things work. A public adjuster is going to have this same effect on a claim experience. So what does that look like? Well, first, you have an independent agent. That agent is there to help you through claims processes. So you had someone who was free. As soon as a public adjuster is involved, they will no longer be able to help you anymore. So that person out of the picture, not able to help you anymore. You're really no longer allowed to work directly with the company adjuster. The public adjuster is going to take over that communication relationship. Now, there's some positives to that. Like I talked about in the pros, they can maybe take some work off of your shoulders, but you lose the direct communication route, and you're completely trusting your public adjuster to be able to communicate to that person in the way that benefits you best. If they are not doing that, if they can't do that, not only did they take that 15%, but now the company adjuster is not happy with you, is not going to be doing the things that they probably would have been able to do had you been directly communicating. So that becomes a problem. And what was a service provider following through with a promise then becomes a more combative struggle. Look, I understand that insurance companies are not like heroes and angels that do everything right all the time, but most insurance companies and most insurance adjusters are trying to do the right thing based on the policy that they have to work with. That is a service provider paying out a claim that you have been paying in for over the course of time. As soon as a public adjuster comes in, it becomes combative, and that simply changes. That is something I've seen over and over and over again, and I rarely have seen it not be that way, except in incredibly large claims with big commercial buildings. That sometimes can be a little bit of a different story. So this fact will generally increase, so it's clogging the process, right? So it's going to increase the time that everything takes. It increases the time for every step of the process. And so what I've seen over time is that a public adjuster oftentimes makes the process last 30 or 40% longer than it would have lasted without a public adjuster involved. All right. So when is the right time to hire a public adjuster? Well, if you have a reason to distrust the insurance company and believe they won't follow through with their agreement, if they are not going to pay what they were supposed to, or you believe they were not going to pay what they're supposed to, then having someone represent you from a professional space that pushes them to do what they should be doing, that probably makes sense. So that would be one time. If you're already in that position, if the company has not followed through with what you feel they should have, and you feel you have no other options but to bring someone in, and if the company does pay out, you're giving them 15%, but it doesn't look like the company was going to pay out anyway. So that potentially could be a scenario where hiring a public adjuster makes a lot of sense. And then finally, the claim is going to be incredibly complicated, and you're willing to pay for someone to be on your side and walk you through the minute details. So that certainly is a scenario where a public adjuster could make more sense, and where I've seen a public adjuster come in and I've walked away feeling, okay, I understand why that individual was involved here. There's so many times when I feel frustrated by public adjusters because they come in when they really aren't needed and just end up taking money from a person who was just trying to experience a claim and would have got it in it anyway. If there's any scenario that I have seen where I'm like, okay, I understand why the public adjuster was there, this would be one example. So what are some rookie mistakes? Well, I think I've kind of led to all of those at this point. The biggest one is hiring a public adjuster with no real clear reason to do so. If you just hire a public adjuster because you have some property damage and you think you should, that is going to be a mistake 9 out of 10 times, and not something I would suggest doing. That is a rookie mistake. Hiring a public adjuster without multiple positive referrals from reputable sources. Look, there's bad people in every type of business. I'm certainly not bad-mouthing public adjusters, but there are a lot of people out there, a lot of public adjusters out there who are out to take your money. And you've got to make sure that if you are going to hire a public adjuster, that you hire a reputable one that has positive reviews from people who you trust. Do not hire the first person that comes to your door or something like that. It's just not going to go well. And then the last rookie mistake is believing a public adjuster when they paint a picture of a huge payout you would have never gotten otherwise. This is a scam. And generally speaking, it is absolutely not true. The only example would be if the insurance company was truly trying to do you wrong and they weren't going to pay you out at all, and the public adjuster got them to do so. Okay, well, that's a payout you got that you wouldn't have got before, but so often the picture is painted that they're going to get you all this more money than the insurance company would ever give you. I just don't think it's true, and I don't think that's a good way to lead a relationship with someone anyway. So what did we address? Well, what is a public adjuster? That is a person hired by the policy holder to represent him in a claim scenario. What are the pros and cons? Went through those. What's the right time? I think if you feel you truly need them is the right time, or if you have an incredibly complicated claim. All right, well, what is next? If you would like to reach out to Shine, if you'd like to have an independent insurance agent to really help you walk through the insurance process to be on your side without any cost, please give us a call. We'd be more than happy to help you out or book a call with us right there. And then finally, if you want to watch more videos about real estate and real estate investing, we've got that right there. All right, well, until the next time, don't forget to shine.